This morning, we continue our exploration of this month's theme of change. Last Sunday, we considered the possibility of greeting all of the feelings and the events that come our way with confident, good energy, welcoming them like guests in our guest house, opening the door to the unknown with a smile and a welcome, and a fearless confidence that says, we can handle whatever comes our way. This is a vital skill to have, an attitude adjustment that builds our strength and our resilience. It's an awareness that we have a choice about how we approach life. And this week I'd like to explore the changes that won't happen if nobody speaks up and makes them happen. Changes that don't come knocking at our door, but that require us to stretch ourselves a little further. Systemic changes that we know in our hearts are necessary. Changing from the status quo towards a more inclusive and humane world. Changes that might be uncomfortable. But today I want us to consider that the discomfort and risk of being bold and sticking our necks out is a small price to pay to right the wrongs of this world. In seminary, I first heard the saying that you ministers comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I wasn't sure I liked that at first because I've been socialized to be a nice person. Nice people, like all of us swimming in a sea of white supremacy culture, we don't want to afflict anyone. We've been socialized to believe that being nice is being good. And the more that we learn about the dynamics of power and privilege, the more we realize that being willing to stir the pot is the only way to move the needle towards social justice. Without that willingness, Unitarian Universalism becomes a liberal social club and not a true, rigorous spiritual community. Many UUs have identities that have been centered in our wider culture, and it is the path of least resistance for some of us to enjoy the spoils of unearned privilege. Not everybody has figured this out yet, but even for those of us who have, it's easy to ignore. I was born with light skin, able-bodied, and cisgendered. English is my first language, and I can come out to people as pansexual, that is, attracted to any gender, when it suits me, and I can pass for heterosexual when it doesn't. Strangers trust me, jobs and schools let me in, and I don't have to worry about how a police officer or a person in authority will perceive me, because I look and act and talk in all the ways that we have been trained to favor and to trust. And it's all too easy to forget that I didn't earn any of that. Yes, I've worked hard and I got my education, but from the moment of my birth, I have had a leg up that many people were not born with. And many of us who benefit from unearned privilege try to give back to people who are less privileged. We do service work, and it feels good, and we pat ourselves on the back for doing good work in the world. And that's good. That's okay. It's good to feel good about service and giving back. And sometimes we just want that to be good enough. We'd prefer just to comfort the afflicted and forget that more uncomfortable and unfamiliar practice of afflicting the comfortable. Sure, there are systemic oppressions, and they are wrong, but we don't really want to make trouble. But if you are here today, you are being called to make good trouble. The phrase good trouble is most often associated with the late, great John Lewis, who is now a blessed memory. John Lewis, as most of you know, was a civil rights activist, and then he was elected state representative from Georgia. He was a black man born to sharecroppers in the South in 1940. And when John Lewis was growing up, his mother told him to stay out of the way and to stay out of trouble. These were words of survival because to be a black boy, especially growing up in the South, still requires extra vigilance and caution. But when John was a teenager, he met the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Dr. King told him that the only way to bring change would be to cause trouble. John Lewis said that Dr. King inspired him to stand up, to speak up, and to speak out. And that's what he did. John Lewis said, "I got in the way, I got in trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble." Through the course of his life, John Lewis worked tirelessly and diligently to speak up and to speak out for black folks and for the oppressed. He remained committed to nonviolence even though he endured more than 40 arrests and suffered numerous physical attacks and serious injuries. Now, I understand that we aren't all going to be like John Lewis or Dr. King or Fannie Lou Hamer, but each and every one of us can make good trouble. And each and every one of us are called to afflict the comfortable in our day-to-day lives. First, we must educate ourselves so that we can learn to identify microaggressions and oppressions that otherwise we might not notice. And then we learn how to disrupt systems of oppression. We learn how to make good trouble. In our Dismantling Racism group, sometimes we do role plays, and we practice having the presence of mind to stand up and to speak out the most effectively and appropriately. This is countercultural. We have been cultured to go with the flow and make nice, and these skills are not easy to learn. Most of us are old dogs, and these are new tricks. But together we're discovering that good trouble doesn't require us to be self-righteous or shaming. Instead, it is just a willingness to speak from our core values. And as you use, this is where the rubber hits the road in our commitment to our values. Are we going to post those 8 principles all over the internet and our churches and claim that we stand for a world community of peace, liberty, and justice for all? Or are we going to actually speak up and be bold and live into those covenants? Are we willing to afflict the comfortable, to be unpopular, misunderstood, and even mocked? We Unitarian Universalists aren't called bleeding heart liberals for nothing. Some of us wear that derogatory label with pride. My heart does bleed for parents trying to get their kids to somewhere where they will be safe from war and hunger and violence. My heart bleeds for people who were born with identities or disabilities or skin colors that are marginalized, and for people going dancing in the club who don't come home. Voices that aren't heard and injustice makes my heart bleed. Many of us gather here each week because we know that this is a safe place to care about other people. This is a safe place to lament injustice. But the lamentation is just one part of what we do here. If we come here only to comfort each other, then our faith is weak and anemic. So whether we feel like it or not, we are called by our faith to afflict the comfortable. At best, that is what Unitarian Universalists do and have always done. We march and we speak out, and sometimes we even get arrested. For women's reproductive rights, we do that to fight climate change, to speak up for displaced people and anyone whose voice is not being heard. We share a belief that we are all connected. We know that we are all in this together and that my liberation is bound up with yours and with everyone's. It matters that we train ourselves to speak up, be it online or at work or at school or here at church. This works best if we don't shame and blame, but sometimes we have to interrupt and say, no, that's not right. This is what's right. And we are here to lean on each other, to grow our confidence and support each other, to acknowledge how hard it is to stick our necks out and work for culture change. A young black woman named Ashley Black posted this on the internet last year about this time. She said, "Casual racists become the juries that set murdering racists free. Don't abide casual racists. Challenge them. Ruin Thanksgiving. Do something." Right? I remember being at a Super Bowl party a few years ago with some people we didn't know very well. And when a child with disabilities came on the TV commercial, the 10-year-old boy we were watching with said to his mother, "Ew, gross." And she just laughed. Now my kids all looked up at me with horror, like, "Mom, are you going to say something?" And I didn't. I failed to live into our covenants. I didn't say anything. I didn't speak up. I like to think that if that happened now that I've spent the last few years doing the role playing and learning, that I would have the skills and the wherewithal to say, "Hey kid, what do you mean by gross? That little boy uses a walker and that's not gross. I bet he's about your age and I bet he's a nice kid." I have heart palpitations even imagining speaking up like that in a house where we were guests and we didn't know the people well. It's likely my response could have driven a wedge between myself or my family and the hosts of the party. But the cost to my soul and the poor example I set for my children was greater than the cost of those heart palpitations and my fear of speaking up. Like most of you and like John Lewis, I was trained to zip it up and not make trouble. And now I am working to unlearn all that niceness. So just like we heard from Howard Zinn in our reading today, he said that people want change, but we feel powerless and alone. And we do not want to be that blade of grass that sticks up above the others and is cut down. He pointed out that we wait for someone else to make the first move. He also noted that if we look back on history, we see that often when someone makes that first move, other people jump in. Here at church, the question we ask ourselves over and over is, if not us, then who? As Unitarian Universalists, our covenants are a call to action, a call to be that blade of grass sticking up and sticking out and taking the risk to say, "Stop, that's not okay." One of our members here talks about how her grandkids do that. They say, "Grandma, that's not right. Don't say it that way." What a blessing for those bold kids to be the blade of grass. They feel comfortable with their grandma. And what if we felt comfortable in this world? Kind of like how we imagine joyfully greeting the guests that show up at the metaphorical door of our guest house. What if we were to welcome the moments that we get to cause good trouble? To afflict the comfortable for the good of us, all of us interconnected beings. Speaking up isn't just good for you or the people you're speaking up for. It's also good for the other person, and it's good for all the uncomfortable people in the room. When we speak up and we speak out, we liberate not only the oppressed, but also the oppressor. In his letter from Birmingham jail, Dr. King said, "Injustice everywhere, anywhere is a threat to injustice." Okay, I just scrambled that. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. If we remember this mutuality, then we can hop and skip to it, knowing that we are fighting the good fight, making good trouble. And even if those people kicked me out of that Super Bowl party for speaking up to their kid, ultimately it would have been worth it. But only if I have faith that it matters. These are leaps of faith because speaking up against hate or ignorance doesn't cause an immediate miraculous cure. Dr. King had faith when he was in Birmingham jail that his suffering, that being separated from his family, and that the danger he lived in that ultimately took his life was worth it. And here we are 60 years later, and racism isn't cured. But his faith gave us these words and changed the world and continues to change the world. We aren't all called to sacrifice our lives for justice. We might not all handcuff ourselves to bulldozers to save the rainforest, but are we willing to say, "Excuse me, what do you mean by that?" You are called to this faith because there is something in you that knows that the way things are is not as good as it gets. And most of us, honestly, we'd rather hide. But we make ourselves show up here again and again because we know that here is a place that we come seeking the courage to do hard things, the courage to hold each other accountable to the core values and covenants we share. And this work is best done together. This is a place where we practice being together, where we invite each other to be mirrors, reflecting ourselves back to one another. Sure, there are less ouches and oops when we remain lone wolves, but to truly grow and learn, we need each other. So take heart. Change and growth are not easy. Unlearning our conditioning to be nice, to go along with the program and not hurt anyone's feelings is hard. And you might not be Lizzo tomorrow, but start now with thinking outside your own identity. Try to imagine what it would be like to be someone else. And then remember, you can't really know. Let that imagination, though, kindle your compassion. Remember the times you have been othered. Mix in a little faith and some curiosity about how our denomination is moving forward and why are we doing that. And then keep coming here, keep being vulnerable, keep being willing to mess up and willing to forgive others who are just going to mess up too. Just do it. And slowly, slowly, you will grow. You will rejoice in those moments that you find your voice. Blessed be, and may it be so.